My husband Will received information in the 1960s that supports the things that we are seeing today and that will occur in the dreams and visions that I was given.
You know, back in the late 1960s, I purchased some gas stations, and in the process I met somebody that worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. Now back then, of course, security wasn't like it is today, and one weekend I was invited down to look at some maps. Now obviously today you couldn't do that, but I went into this room, this big room at the U.S. Geological Survey, and there were great big huge maps, and the maps you had to fold them out. I mean, they were bigger than the maps that you see in a architect's office. And as we rolled back the maps, I was amazed, because some of the things I saw are very pertinent for today. In fact, California is held up by stalagmites and stalactites. They're 5 and 6 miles big. So underneath of most of California is hollow. And there's a ledge that goes out, and the ledge goes out in the water, and on the outside of the edge of the ledge, silt is building up as the currents come up from South America. Well, that was interesting. Then I saw the Mississippi Valley. Well, the Mississippi Valley is under above huge caverns. So if the top ever broke, the whole valley would drop. And then I saw some maps of the Canary Islands. Now, the Canary Islands sit right off of the coast of Africa, of West Africa. And they're unstable. They sit on stalagmites and stalactites, very much like California. Well, that was pretty interesting. That was back in 1969. Well, in 1972, I had my experience with our Savior, Yeshua, Jesus Christ. And in the process, I was in a ministry with a man who was very much into the world of setting people free. And he told me a story of some prophecies that came about in 1951. Now, this was 1972. So in 1951, there were 2 prophets, one in Canada and one in Florida. And they both had the same dream the same night. In the first dream, they were looking down on the U.S., and they saw the major cities blackened as by fire. Now, they had no idea what that was. This was in 1951. But then they both had an amazing dream or vision, and they were standing on a mountain, high on a mountain, and I'm pretty sure now it was the Rockies, and they were looking out across the coast, and all of a sudden the land lifted up and slid off into the sea. Well, why would a land lift up and slide off into the sea? Well, just last week I learned that the San Andreas Fault is a vertical fault. It's straight up and down. So if that fault were to break and California were to turn up on those stalagmites and stalactites, what would happen? It couldn't just drop. It would have to rise up and fall into the sea. And let's look at the Mississippi Valley. Very interesting. The Mississippi Valley is over huge caverns. Well, you know about the sinkholes that are happening now all down in the south. Well, I'm going to tell you what the sinkholes are. The sinkholes are salt mines that are filling with water, and as the salt gets soft, the land above drops down into the wet salt below, and that's where the sinkholes are coming from. And there are huge salt mines under the Gulf of Mexico, and now they're beginning to leak. There are huge salt mines up around the Great Lakes, and they're beginning to leak. What happens to salt when it gets wet? It turns to mush. Well, if the mush is underneath the land, what happens to the land? The land drops down. And you've heard of all the sinkholes happening now in Louisiana and down along the Gulf Coast and down in Florida. Well, these things are all pertaining to what we're learning now about the salt mines. And just to carry this a little bit further, when I went in and looked at those maps, I was astounded because they were so clear. And our government obviously has had that knowledge since the 60s, because this was 1969. And then something happened in 1978. I met a man in Roanoke, Virginia. He was a graduate of Virginia Tech. He was world renowned for his core drillings. This man was extremely wealthy. He would be hired by engineering firms to go in and do core samples when they were going to build skyscrapers or hospitals or major heavy buildings. He would go in, he would do core samples. Well, this was 1978, and he told me about going up to Manhattan. And he said he was going up there to do core samples under a new hospital. And it was a really large structure, so it had a lot of weight. And he was doing core samples, and he got down to a certain point, and all of a sudden, he hit a cavern. And the cavern, he said, was 120 feet deep. Well, underneath of Manhattan Island is a huge cavern. Well, if you've ever been around mines, when you're around a mine, in order to hold the top up, they put bolts in the top and they tighten the top up. It's called the top. Well, every cavern has a top. Well, if Manhattan Island's cavern, if the top ever splits or breaks or cracks, where's the island going to go? It's going to go straight down. So now we're getting all these revelations about things that could potentially happen. Now, the truth is, we only know what Father tells us. We don't know anything further than that. And we don't have any idea what's going to cause the tsunami on the East Coast. But we have some possibilities. First of all, we know that Efren Rodriguez has had a vision for many, many years about a meteor or an asteroid or some large rock hitting an island between Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. Now, that certainly could cause some kind of a disruption. Secondly, there have been many, many visions of people seeing 3 rocks hit the earth, one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off of North Carolina, one down more closer to the South America, and the one hitting in the Gulf. So it's possible that those rocks hitting the earth could cause this huge disruption. The second thing is the Canary Islands are unstable. Suppose something happened in the Canary Islands were to fall into the sea. Well, it's already been calculated that 9 hours from then, a wall of water would hit the East Coast that was 300 to 600 feet high. Well, a 600-foot high wall of water, that's okay, but do you realize how fast the tsunami travels? They travel at excess of 500 miles an hour. So is it possible that could be what causes this? It could be an earthquake, because there are fault lines all across the planet. And we're hearing a lot now about the fault lines in the Pacific, up near Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. So it's interesting that all of these things happened for me back in the 60s. And today, my wife is having these dreams and visions. So this is just a confirmation. This is just possibilities. Of course, we have no idea what could cause the water to slosh around in the ocean to that degree. But we do know that something's going to happen in the fall of this year. Many, many prophecies. So, and we don't know what those things are going to be, but we just know it's going to be an interesting time. So I'm just sharing this with you so you can see that this is something that our government's known about for a long time. The Russian government a couple years ago told us about rocks that they say were going to hit the earth. So governments know what's going on. But now you and I know what's going on because God is bringing this word forth through many, many, many prophets. Not just my wife, but many, many prophets. So I want to thank you for your time. Do you have anything you want to add, honey?
Yes. The one thing that I do want to add is that the Lord, when He showed me the tsunami hitting the East Coast and actually told me that it would hit the East Coast, He did not, I repeat, He did not give me a time frame. He did not give me a month, nor did He give me a year. He has just told us to prepare and to get off the East Coast.